This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. So the history of the library is an expansive one, dating back 5,000 years to the Library of Ashburnirpal, which I've actually talked about in a history about ancient libraries in another video. But the history of the public library is quite another thing. You see, out of all the thousands of years libraries have existed, the public library has only existed for a few hundred years. In British history, the term public library refers to a purpose-built structure established under the terms of the 1850 Public Libraries Act, and its principal successor, the 1919 Public Libraries Act, including central, branch and village libraries in England, from 1850 until 1939. As such, under this definition, the first public library in Britain was Manchester's Free Public Library, which was established in 1852. However, there were public libraries established before that, though they didn't meet the legal definition of a public library when established. Chetham's Library was founded in 1653 and is the oldest surviving public library in Britain. It was originally built in 1421 to accommodate colleges of priests, but when Humphrey Chetham died, the financier of the library, he left the library in his will to the public, saying that the library was, quote, for the use of scholars and others well affected, and instructed the librarian to require nothing of any man that cometh into the library. Even then, Chetham wasn't really expecting anyone other than scholars and clergymen to use the library. Ordinary people weren't really expected to have any desire or need for it. And whilst you and I know libraries to be free resources for everyone, well, for centuries before, it wasn't the case. In fact, it was the reverse, because after the invention of the printed press, for centuries before the creation of public libraries were private spaces, indicative of wealth, elitism and power. The Byzantine Empire, for example, maintained their social hierarchy by differentiating between 4 different types of library. You had the imperial, the patriarchal, the monastic and the private. Chetham Library was one of the very few libraries in the UK that was free and accessible to the public. For the 18th century, it was all about subscription services. The subscription library is exactly as it sounds. It's a pay-as-you-go model, which unfortunately seems to be foreshadowing what may potentially become a trend amidst, the mass closure of public libraries in the UK and abroad, and the favourability of subscription service models in today's age. However, for subscription libraries, you paid a rather hefty membership price, or you were forced to purchase a share of the library to gain access, such as the Bromley House Library, whose introductory share price was 5 guineas, which is approximately £550 a day, and that was then followed by an annual cost of 2 guineas. But for that price, members had full access to books, maps, fossils, antique coins, and even scientific instruments. But subscription libraries couldn't meet everyone's needs, which then brought about the formation of circulating libraries, which would have been called rental libraries today. It's believed that the original circulating library was established in 1737 by William Bathoe in London, and the business model was much like a Blockbuster was in the 90s. Subscribers rented books from the library, but where they differed from subscription libraries was that they asked for a smaller cost up front. You paid for the rental rather than the huge membership price. And as you can imagine, this subscription model is where our culture of fashionable reading and popular reading was born. You see, there were certain books that caught people's attention, and they were eager to rent them out too. But as the business model didn't really cater for multiple editions of other books, the circulating library model had to sell other goods like newspapers and stationery to survive whilst people were waiting on the waiting list for that book they wanted to rent. Now, I give all this history to say that libraries were not established as a utopian, accessible, free-for-all knowledge space that they are regarded today. They were very much middle to upper class spaces all the way until the legal establishment of the Free Public Library in the 1850 Public Library Service Act. And I hope that historical preface helps colour the question that I'd like to ask. Do we have a library supremacy culture here online? You see, there's a growing community of people who hold public libraries as superior and judge anyone for opting to purchase books instead of using their library. Now, I only came across this discussion, which was brought up to me by a lovely viewer of my channel who wrote it into my Google Forms and asked me to discuss it. because they said they'd seen comments in my videos, primarily a bit of judgment from library users against book ownership, and how this judgment seemed to overlook the privilege of having access to a library, which this user did not. And I know what you're thinking, surely the privilege is the other way around. Libraries as we know them were built to be public access spots, which doesn't require any money from members of the public, whilst book ownership is a privileged status of a person with disposable income. But I sort of actually hope to demonstrate from the historical introduction, the egalitarian model of the library does not lie in its origins, and sadly, we live in a time when the public funding is being stripped back and libraries are under threat, and we as users are also under threat, because the undoing of the egalitarian libraries so many of us have come to love is actually under threat right now and is happening as we speak. But before I get any further into the video, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. So whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it really easy for you to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to time, all in one place and all on your terms. I've gone through so many iterations online, from blogging to now running a business, and Squarespace has seen all sides of my online evolution. I'm currently working on several writing courses and writing workshops, which I can host on Squarespace website, because it allows me to have members only content for my community, where I can sell access to online courses or blogs or videos and memberships, and purchases can be anything from a one-time fee to subscription access. And when it comes to evolving my business, I can make smarter business decisions with Squarespace's intuitive built-in analytics tools, which lets me review my website traffic, learn where to focus my engagement, and track revenue from my bookings to invoices and product sales, all in one place. So if that sounds interesting to you, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Lady of the Library to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. You see, not everyone has access to a public library. Living in a city with a wealth of library choices is a privilege in of itself. I recently moved from the city of Edinburgh, which had around 3 libraries in walking distance, and 3 huge academic libraries in the middle of town. But now I live in a wee little coastal town, and the closest library is actually 20 minutes away, and it mainly stocks children's books. If I want to visit a library that has a bigger selection to browse, I'm looking at a 45-minute bus ride away. When I was researching for this video, I saw an article about the closure of my hometown public library where I was born and raised, which will officially have shut permanently in June. And as of 2025, the UK is losing libraries at a rate of 40 libraries a year, but that doesn't include Scotland, because here in Scotland there are plans to close 20 public libraries this year, a decision which local authors and advocates are fighting against. Unfortunately, libraries are a use them or lose them situation, and the people who are more at risk of having their libraries cut are in underfunded and neglected areas where arguably they are needed most. Across the UK, 7% of libraries in the most deprived have been closed since 2016, compared to only 3% in the least deprived areas. Now, despite my somewhat hefty book collection, I'm actually an avid library user. In fact, I technically use libraries around 5 days a week. I'm primarily a user of the online library resources, which are available via my university, the National Library, and my former university library, and my local library. And I'm also a member of other university libraries via a SCONAL scheme, as it's known as the UK, where PhD researchers can access other institutions' libraries. So I have a load of library cards. The library I visited the most was my former local library, where I went at least once a week physically, but the National Library has been a significant and important hub for me over the past 4 years, and 24-hour access at Edinburgh University Library has also been incredibly useful for me late night working. I also regularly borrow from my local library. I've taken out 6 books this year from my local library and 11 from my academic libraries. And don't get me wrong, I can see why there has been a vocal shift over the past few years online by library user supremacists, it's a term I'm using very fondly by the way, who have been pushing back against the hyper-capitalism displayed on social media by BookTok and Bookstagram, and then also by the closure of libraries in the news. And I see that because I agree with it. Book ownership is still very much a status symbol, as it's, been seen online. We have videos where it's just people showing what books they have bought, and that can be as little as 10 to as many as 70 to 100 in a single video. So what I would say is that, a passionate advocacy for libraries should be conducted with a degree of sensitivity because there is an awareness that we are promoting the importance of libraries at the expense of coming off as holier than thou kind of judgment, which may actually really hurt people whose local libraries have been closed or they don't live anywhere near them, particularly in America where there are huge waves of land where there are no libraries nearby. But book ownership is more applicable because they can just order a book online and they can get to them. So really we shouldn't be judging people or scoffing at them for buying books or owning books instead of using a library. We should be celebrating libraries and encouraging it. I would argue that if you are a book lover, supporting your local library should be top of everyone's priority list, even if you do something as small as checking out a single book a month from your local library and then use its other services like its printers or its computers. Because even if you feel like there isn't a public library close enough to you to use, America has more public libraries than McDonald's. If you can get to a McDonald's, you can likely get to your public library. In England and Wales, approximately 78% of the population are within a 30-minute walk of a public library. And yet, despite living so close to libraries, only 30% of adults aged 16 and over used a public library service once in the previous 12 months in England. So if you live close to a McDonald's in America, take into note that there is likely a public library within your distance, and if there is not, please support independent bookshops as much as you possibly can. But I think both independent bookshops and libraries, even if you can't read the book fast enough, taking the book out is incredible, showing the library that you're willing to use it. Even if you take out books that you can't read all of them of, return them, obviously, keep them protected. But also just keep taking books out if you can't read them, just to help support your local library. Because sometimes I only get through half of the book. I think the last book that I took out was it was a book about addiction by Mate Gabor, and I was very curious about it, but I never had time to finish it. I only had one round of it, and I only got to around halfway, and it was called back because there was a huge waiting list for that book. So I was like, okay, never got to finish that. So I couldn't even mark it as like DNF on Goodreads because I didn't want to say I DNF'd it. I just didn't have access to the book anymore. And right now I currently have a collection of Roald Dahl short stories, and it's a chunky book. And I know I'll only read probably some of the stories from it unless I become addicted to it. But that's the joy of it. You get to dip in and out, and there's no cost effect with that. And yes, it can be a bit frustrating if you love the book a lot. But then maybe if you loved that book and you didn't get to finish it, potentially you can then buy it from an independent bookshop if you think it's worth it. But also I have found using the library so beneficial for my book club reads, because my book club reads do not pick books that I am interested in, so going to the library and taking it out and then going, I didn't like that from just reading the beginning of it, I hated it, and returning it saves me so much money because I'm not buying the books that they recommend. I bought the Blue Sisters book because everyone was saying we have to read it. I was like, fine. I got it second hand or Vinted. Oh my god, I wasted £1.75 on that book. I will never get that £1.75 back. If you're interested in buying it off me, I'll pop it on my Vinted again. I knew I wouldn't like it, but everyone in the book club was just so enthusiastic and they sent me links of Vinted, and I was like, everyone's looking at me wanting me to get one of the books because I'm such a bloody snob when it comes to the selection. I will do it. I regret it so much. What do you think? Have you seen there's like a library supremacy culture online? Do you think it's more of a rebellion against hypercapitalism, or do you think it's actually in defence of libraries which are closing down? I am really scared that more libraries are going to close down, particularly, the ones near me are pretty run down already, and I know that if libraries are going to close in Scotland, potentially mine's going to, so I'm hyper aware of using it quite regularly. And it's really sad to know that the library that I grew up in as a kid is now being permanently closed. And then that would make the nearest library to that library, again, pretty hard to get to. So yeah, it's not the greatest of news ever. So please use your public libraries as in any way you can. Online services are also a thing. You can also reserve books online, and also just reach out to your local library, because if you live quite far away from it, they may be able to accommodate to have a halfway point or a drop-off selection, because I think they do accommodate people with disabilities and so forth. So see if they have an outreach program where they can pick up books and drop off books for you if you are too far away. But thank you so much for listening to today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider giving it a like and thumbs up. Wait, they're the same thing. Subscribe. And thank you as always to my Patreons for making this possible. And thank you as always to my top tier patrons, my librarians. Janice, Eric Taylor, Jenny Erdevane, Marina, Psycho Teddy, Fritz Anderson, Lee, Wee Lauren, Nicholas Reed and Andrea Bazil. Thank you so much as always. And I hope you are happy and healthy. And remember, books save lives. so keep reading.